Basically, we have a match pair of two big triangles. Your boat would hang from a crossmember right here. People are stunned after hearing what the police found in the Blue Ridge Mountains just now. A huge network of tunnels under the land that the famous prepper Eustace Conway used to own has finally been found. Not many people thought this network existed. At first, they thought it was just another set of caves, but it turned out to be something that people had built. Strong beams, carefully carved walls, and secret passageways were all signs of years of careful work. They weren't ready for where it would lead. People in the area have long talked about Eustace's strange disappearances into the forest, the long hours he spent digging, and the mysterious things he said about how the ground held the keys to freedom. That wasn't just theory, it looks like. They looked like plans. The tubes go deep under Turtle Island Preserve, a private wilderness area in Eustace. He lived his whole life shielding. But when they looked through one line all the way to the end, they found something that changes everything about who he was and what he might have been hiding. Make sure to subscribe and stay with us before we tell you what's below. We don't know everything we thought we knew about Eustace Conway because of what's waiting in those caves. It all started with a problem that seemed normal. The Blue Ridge had been hit by heavy rain, and at Turtle Island Preserve, the people who work there saw strange depressions appearing near the property's edge. A young volunteer named Caleb found a sinkhole one morning that looked too regular and well-shaped to be natural. As he dug through the mud, his shovel hit something hard and metal. He dug for hours and found what looked like an old iron. The hatch's hinges are buried under years of clay and roots, making it look almost like a dinosaur. It was there for no clear reason. Some people thought it might have been a storm shelter from the Civil War, but Eustace's marks on the latch showed that it wasn't. A strong, musty wind rushed out when they finally got it open. It was old, cold, and smelled like the ground hadn't breathed in years. A wooden ladder led down into the dark space below the hatch. Even though they were smooth from use, the rungs looked like they had been taken care of not too long ago. One by one, the team climbed down with flashlights in their hands. They got to the bottom and were in a small tunnel that was too far away for their lights to reach. The walls were made stronger with carefully cut logs that were joined together in a way. Anyone who knows Eustace's work will recognize it right away. They went deeper and saw more strange things, like symbols cut into the beams, jars stacked neatly on shelves with herbs and animal bones, and old lanterns covered in dust. For a long time, someone had lived or worked here. The tube wasn't just there. It had a plan, a structure, and a goal. After going down the twisting path, they came to a bigger room with broken tools lying around. Pickaxes, drills, and what looked like a homemade pulley system were used to move things. It screamed Eustace's name everywhere. It was very careful, useful, and also very spiritual. People in the area remembered that he would leave for hours or even days at a time, taking supplies into the woods and coming back covered in mud. He would smile, but never say where he was. A lot of people thought he was just thinking alone because he often talked about digging deeper to find the truth. But now everyone was thinking about what that phrase really meant, which was very scary. It became more clear as they went deeper. This wasn't just a place to hide, it was a web. Each cave split off into several different paths. They caved in, and some were too tight to get into. The team knew they were only scratching the top of something much bigger. Eustace may have been working on it in secret for decades. It was still not clear what this secret system was for, but one thing was for sure. It wasn't meant to be found. After hours of being covered in dirt and scared by what they'd seen, the caretaker came out and whispered. He wasn't just surviving out here. He was preparing for something. When the exploration team came back to the site with better lighting and gear, they were determined to map the whole system. The smell of wet earth got stronger as they went down through the hatch again, and the air got cooler. They became more aware that this wasn't just a tube as they went deeper. It was a whole world below ground. The first room was almost 20 feet across, and its walls were carefully made stronger with stone and wood. On one side was a rough desk that was full of chisels, leather gloves, and tins that had rusted. On top of it, black tracks of candle soot on the ceiling showed that Eustace had worked late into the night down here. They went down a narrow hallway that split off to the left and came across what looked like a storage room. There were dozens of glass jars on the shelves. Eustace had written his name on each one and sealed it with wax. Spices, herbs, roots, and dried leaves. Some of the jars were full of meat and fat that had been left to cure, the kind of goods that are meant to last for months when you are alone. The person who built this wasn't planning to spend the night underground. This was a survival method made to keep people alive. The tunnel began to twist sharply as they went on, leading to a hill that dropped them to a lower level. The pieces of an old handcart and a pulley system that was fixed to the roof were found there. A clever system for moving dirt and rocks to the surface. Eustace showed off his tech skills in a big way. Each beam was measured, and each support was put in a way that made sense. It was a mix of art and survival science. But what the team didn't like were the marks on the walls. Along the edges of the cave were hand-carved symbols that were repeated and looked almost like rituals. Some looked like mountains, others like spirals, and one sign showed up over and over again, an eye with roots all around it. Experts later found that the pattern came from old Appalachian folklore and was meant to represent a guardian of nature who lived under the ground. It's still not clear if Eustace used it for defense or as a sign. After going around a few times, they came to what looked like the center of the maze, a huge room that went beyond the light path they were on. There was a big stone slab in the middle of it, with melted candles, sage bundles, and animal bone pieces carefully placed in geometric shapes around it. Nothing was moving in the air. It was still and quiet. It wasn't just a place to work. It was a shrine. Charcoal pictures of mountains, trees, rivers, and people tangled with roots were all over the walls. It had a magical, almost holy feel to it. Some say Eustace thought that these tunnels led straight to the mountain spirit, and that each chamber showed a different level of harmony between people and the earth. One of the team members saw something strange on the far side of the room before they could look any further. A seal on a wooden door with iron bars on the inside that is hidden by moss and mud. On the wood, there were words that said, "The deeper you go, the more truth you find." No one knew what was behind that door, but as soon as they opened it, the things got even stranger with Eustace's tunnel's mystery. The group stood still in front of the wooden door. Rust had eaten away at the iron hinges, but they were still strong enough to keep whatever was behind it out. The writing on the surface. Everyone got chills when they heard, "The deeper you go, the more truth you find." They used crowbars to pry it open. There is a scream-like sound coming from the basement passageways made by wood cracking. A rush of thick old air came out, like it hadn't moved in decades. What they saw when their flashlights cut through the darkness wasn't as well made as the previous tunnels. The walls here are made of stone. Steel was used instead of the beams. It was cooler, spicier, and more mechanical. There is nothing like Eustace's natural work. There were pieces of wire all over the floor, rusty pipes and metal pieces that looked like they came from the military. It looked like someone else had picked up where he left off and made his simple haven into something much more complicated. A big air vent pipe that went straight up stood in the middle of the room. No one knew the end of it. Two of the men pointed their lights up, but the beam went out into the void. There were old, shielded power lines in this area that seemed to go to the far wall where an old control box was located. They found pieces of radio parts, coils, and antenna lines inside when they opened it. The person who changed this chamber knew a lot about communication methods, which was not something Eustace was known for in public. Could it? Could it be that someone else used this spot after him? Or was Eustace talking to people outside of the grid that we didn't know existed? One adventurer found a rusted tin with rolled parchment paper sealed in wax among the broken things that were lying around. There were drawings of radio towers, coded frequency numbers, and notes in Eustace's handwriting inside. A lot of times the words Skynet of Freedom and electromagnetic lines of communication were used. Researchers later found that Eustace had said he wanted to live somewhere where no signals could reach him. He might not have been hiding from modern life. He might have been making plans for how to live after it. As they looked deeper into the room with the steel walls, another sign showed up. Gas masks, old flashlights, and emergency goods wrapped in oilcloth in a crate. These weren't simple things. They were made for the troops. On the side of one box, the words U.S. Depth of Interior, 1964, were written in very small letters. It didn't make sense. That was a long time ago, before Eustace bought Turtle Island Preserve. Could someone else have started this network before Eustace, and all he did was make it bigger? The timetable was becoming less clear. No matter what the reason was, one thing was clear. This room wasn't just a place to hide, it was a place to run things. The group quickly realized they weren't just in a hideout because of the strange mix of survival tools, communication gear, and ritual marks everywhere. One adventurer saw something else when he brushed the dirt off of a side panel. There was a faint outline of another opening, but this time it was concreted shut. Eustace had built a wall around it on purpose. Why did he want to hide it so badly? While they were thinking about whether to break through, one of them said in a whisper, "What if we're not supposed to see what's behind there?" But they just had to find out. It wasn't clear to them what was beyond the wall that would finally explain why Eustace built the tunnels and what he was really trying to keep safe. The team finally broke through the concrete wall after hours of careful work. The air that came out was dry and strangely warm, like it had been shut for 50 years. They went past it and found another hallway. This one is shorter and slopes down at a sharp angle. Unlike the earlier parts, this cave looked like it had just been cut. The earth was loose, the supports were newer, and there were faint marks on the walls that showed Eustace had kept digging even after he died. As they walked along the road, they could hear water dripping far away. Now it didn't feel like a man-made tunnel as much as it did like a live thing moving and breathing around them. A few hundred feet into the narrow tunnel, it opened up into a room where the ground turned into rock. A light breeze made it seem like there might be an exit close. Then an explorer's flashlight picked up a strange light. Wood pieces covering what looked like a big hole in the ground in the shape of a circle. When they took them off, they saw a narrow shaft going up diagonally. It turned out that the tunnel went well past the property line and cut its way to the Watauga River. They followed it for almost a quarter of a mile until it ended at an iron hatch that was cleverly hidden under a big tree near the water. When they took it down, morning light came in for the first time in decades. The escape tube wasn't just any old thing. It was very well done. It was angled just right toward the river and had a hidden opening that could only be seen from one way. Later, people in the area confirmed that Eustace often camped near this part of the river, which he called his freedom line. It was now clear that the tunnel was meant to be an escape route, a quick way to disappear into nature. But why would Eustace need a way out? He always taught about being honest, living simply, and being one with nature. People who knew him best say he, after several fights with government officials over land rules, became less trusting of outside meddling. He once said, "They want to own the air I breathe." The tunnel system may have been his last act of defiance, a way to show his freedom and make sure he could always live by his own rules. But there was a deeper message that was even stronger. The last room before the river was different from the others. Inside, the floor was made up of circles of stones that were arranged in strange ways. In the middle was an old wooden box that was bound with rope and wrapped in animal skin. They found letters written by hand and a small notebook inside when they opened it. In one entry, it said, "Freedom can no longer exist above ground. The world's roots are safer than its sky." On another page, there were numbers that looked like coordinates that were etched deeply into the paper. It was miles from Turtle Island and in the foothills of the Appalachians. There might be more tunnels there, part of a much larger network. Or it could have been a message from Eustace that he didn't want to be found yet. No one knew for sure, but as the team closed the hatch, they couldn't shake the feeling that the tunnels weren't just Eustace's hiding place. They were his message to the world. Freedom isn't something you live above the ground. It's something you build below it. Days later, they came back with better tools and went back into Eustace Conway's secret underground world again. This time, they focused on the smaller passageways that led off of the main chambers. They had never been to this area before through one of these side tunnels. It led them to a narrow crawl space that led into what they would later call the Forbidden Room. The entrance was partially collapsed and blocked off by thick layers of rock and wood, almost as if Eustace had tried to bury it. It took them hours of digging through the rubble to finally make a path wide enough to squeeze through. What they found inside made everyone stop and listen. The air was thick, still, and cold, and there was a faint smell of smoke and old wood. There was a wooden table against the far wall that was covered in wax-sealed jars, leather-bound books, and folded maps that had been drawn by hand. Around the room's center was a stone pedestal that held an old animal skull that had been carved with intricate designs. Ancient Appalachian spiritual images, many of which were linked to Cherokee burial.